Okay, this is gonna be a long video. Let's get started. Hey everyone, I hope y'all are having a great day, and today I'll be talking about Carve the Mark by Veronica Roth. So if you know me at all, then hopefully you know that I love Divergent, and I love Veronica Roth, and I feel like Veronica Roth is one of those YA authors that is popular but also gets shit on a lot. Kind of reminds me of like Taylor Swift, but of the YA scene, but I love Taylor Swift. And I love Veronica Roth. So Divergent was like my thing. I have Divergent t-shirts, I have a wall of Divergent movie posters, even though I don't support that movie franchise and I think it was a disaster. I have a considerable collection of the Divergent books. I even have Divergent jewelry, and so on and so forth. So like, you know how Whitney from Witty Novels has Shatter Me, and Emma from Emma Books has the Shadowhunter books? Like, that's what Divergent is to me. So when I heard about Carve the Mark, I thought to myself, okay, so Space Odyssey, that doesn't really sound like my thing, but Veronica Roth is my thing, so obviously I'm gonna be excited about this book. And then the release date got closer, and the controversy started. And yes, I think it would be a very unfair and also really ignorant decision to review Carve the Mark without addressing the controversy around it. So that's what I'm gonna do first, and then I'm going to go into my actual book review. Also, I mentioned my Divergent obsession to explain my interest in Carve the Mark, and I don't want it to be seen as a source of bias. Don't think that because I am partial towards Divergent, that in any way skews my opinion or makes me more defensive of Veronica or makes me less likely to want to recognize problematic aspects of this book. If you've been on my channel, if you've watched my book reviews, I feel like I can honestly say that I'm not someone who's like very afraid to point out something that's problematic in a book that I read. Like, I do aim to be a critical reviewer, and if I miss something during my first read and someone else points it out to me and I'm like, oh wait, you're so right, then I'm not afraid to correct myself and admit that I was wrong. But anyway, that was just another disclaimer. Let's move on. I've read a lot of reviews and a lot of posts about Carve the Mark in preparation for this video, and I don't do that in an attempt to like steal other people's ideas or be influenced by other people's opinions and try to align myself with the majority or anything like that. I do it because if you're going to enter a conversation, it's probably best to listen to what's already been said. And actually, while I was preparing my notes for this video, I watched Francina Simone's discussion video on Carve the Mark, and I thought it was so funny, so excellent, just very, very spot on. And I'll link that video down below in case you haven't checked it out. I think it's well worth a watch. So like I said, I read a lot of reviews, I read a lot of articles, a lot of blog posts and stuff like that about Carve the Mark, and I think the main post that really began to stir this pot was a post made by Justina Ireland, who's also a YA author. She talked about two books in particular, Carve the Mark and The Continent, and how both of these books are subliminally racist, that they rely on this trope of a dark-skinned aggressor. Like, both books perpetuate internalized racism by depicting a white, gentler race versus a savage, dark-skinned race. So Carve the Mark came out in January of 2017, I believe, and this post was posted on December 4th, 2016, so the book had not been released yet. And since it was posted, it has been deleted, so I'm not sure why it was deleted. If anyone knows why this post was deleted, please let me know in the comments, because I think it's really interesting. But anyway, luckily the post is still retrievable and accessible through the Wayback Machine, which is a Internet Archive website in case you're interested in that. So I'll leave the link to the original post below. But yeah, I remember after this blog post was posted, I saw it all over Twitter and I saw it all over Goodreads, and everyone was talking about this post and this idea that Carve the Mark was racist. And so I was like, oh my god, I was very shook about this. And so I read the article and I was like, oh my lord, this is a problem. This sucks. If what Justina Ireland is writing in this post is true, if this book, if Carve the Mark does perpetuate this internalized racism, if that was true, then I was honestly heartbroken. So at this point, this book had not been published yet, and I did not have an ARC of it, so I had no way of reading the book for myself to figure out if what Justina Ireland had posted was true. So I was just believing it. I believed it, and I believed everyone else, because then, so like I mentioned before, this post was posted before Carve the Mark's release date, and I was not lucky enough to get an ARC of Carve the Mark, so I had no way of reading the book for myself to figure out whether what Justina Ireland had posted was true. But based on the post and based on the way that the people who had read the book began apologizing for missing this racism, it sounded pretty true to me, and so I believed it, and I was, like I said, heartbroken, but also I was just so disappointed. I was so disappointed that my queen of YA would write something like this, and that no editor or no sensitivity reader. Like, no one in this publishing house caught it. But like I said, it was Veronica Roth, so obviously I was still going to read this book at the very least, just so that I could confirm any claims and make my own decisions about this. So that was before Carve the Mark was published, then Carve the Mark was published, and a little while later, Veronica Roth released her own blog post on her Tumblr responding to these racism allegations. I'll leave the link down below. I read it right when she posted it. At that point, I had not read Carve the Mark yet, so I was still going on this belief that Justina Ireland and everyone that was saying that this book was racist was right, that this book was racist. And I think in her blog post, Veronica Roth was very careful not to trod on other people's voices. Like, her intent was very clearly not to quiet this discussion or cover it all up. Instead, it was very explanatory and a little bit apologetic, but also pretty reasonably defensive. And what stuck with me more than the post itself was the reaction I saw to this post, especially on Twitter. On Twitter, I saw a lot of people saying, or you could just apologize. Don't try to excuse your racism, apologize for it. It was vicious. The reaction was honestly very vicious. But at the time, I thought it wasn't entirely unjustified either. Like, if your book was racist, and even if it wasn't your intention for it to be racist, you know, say sorry, own up to it. So that was all pre-reading Carve the Mark. Now imagine my surprise when I finally read this book cover to cover, and I'm thinking, did everyone else read the same book? I was like, I feel like I'm missing something. Did they change this book after they released the arc? So like I said, let me tell you, I try to be very critical when I read, and I also try to be very, very aware of things that could be potentially problematic, especially in terms of race, because, you know, as a person of color, I experience a degree of oppression, discrimination, not as much as other races or ethnicities, I'm sure, but that's still something that I like to keep my eye out for. So it's not like I don't want to admit that this book is racist, but in Carve the Mark by Veronica Roth, there is no white race that's gentle, and there's no dark-skinned race that's savage or brutal. There is a planet of two societies, the Shotet and the Thuva, and the Thuva are gentler in their practices, and the Shotet are definitely more violent, they're more brutal. So yeah, there are two societies on this planet with very different practices, but is that division marked by race or color? No. In terms of race and color and appearance, the two societies are indistinguishable. People of the same society, heck, even people of the same freaking family look so different. They have an entire span of hair textures and eye colors and skin colors. In the same family, there are people with pale skin and dark skin and curly hair and light hair. In her blog post, Justina Ireland writes that the Thuva are, quote, ostensibly white since they are described by their ability to blush and their light eyes. But that's not true. After reading Carve the Mark, I went back to the blog post and I saw that line and I was like, what? There's a lot of blended blood in this society, which is why everyone looks so different. And the fact that there's so much blended blood actually plays into the plot line later on in the story. So I was sitting there thinking, like, did these people finish reading the book? I just didn't see it. In the way that I read this book, there was no racial divide between the Shotet and the Thuva. The Shotet are savage, they're brutal, yes, I'm not denying that. The Thuva are gentler, they're more like rural and, you know, less combative, that's true. But in both societies, people have different skin tones, different hair textures, different eye colors, like, what? Also, Justina Ireland talks about the Thuva being described as ostensibly white because they can blush and have light-colored eyes. Syra, who's our Shotet protagonist, literally blushes in the novel. Also, Akos, our Thuva protagonist, our gentler protagonist, literally has Shotet blood in him. Like, I genuinely feel like Justina Ireland and everyone else who's been claiming that this book perpetuates this trope of a dark-skinned aggressor, like, they cherry-picked characters and then painted one society light and the other dark, and then ignored every other character that was a contradiction to that kind of coding, that color coding of the society. So, is Carve the Mark racist? No, I don't think it is. Does it have a gentler society and a more brutal society? Yes, that's true. Is that societal division marked by race or color? No, it is not. Now, if you want to make the argument that having a society that's more savage and more brutal to begin with already stems from real-world stereotypes of people of color, I don't think that's completely invalid. But I do think that it's invalid that there's been this creation of a color divide in Carve the Mark that doesn't have legitimate textual evidence. So, those are my 2 cents on the racism controversy. But wait, there's more! Carve the Mark has also been attacked for its ableism. Syra, our main character, has a current gift, which is a special ability that is sourced from the current, which is like this stream of power, I guess, that runs through this universe. And her current gift is that she constantly feels pain, and she can actually give other people this pain if they make skin contact with her. Kind of like Shatter Me. Now, Roth has said that Sarah's current gift was inspired by some of her friends who have chronic pain. And a lot of readers who also suffer from chronic pain are mad that Roth frames this illness as a gift. Now, unlike my thoughts on the racism controversy, my thoughts on ableism are kind of murky. They're kind of divided. To be fair, for a lot of the book, Sarah's current gift is not romanticized or glorified in any way. It's actually a source of pain that she's forced to live with. It sucks a lot. She hates it. It's not made out to be some kind of like learning experience. It disables her and causes her a lot of grief. And I've seen a lot of people get mad about the terminology of current gift. But I think if you just look at the current gifts that other people have in this series too, like Sarah constantly feels pain, there's someone else who literally cannot feel pain. I think it's pretty clear that current gift is just terminology. It's not meant to be a literal gift. Like, their characters are not forced to be grateful for their current gift. They can hate it. It can suck. And in a lot of cases, it does suck. I wonder if people would have been less angry if this wasn't called a current gift and if it was just called a current thing or a current mark. But that being said, there are characters in this story who tell Syra that the only reason she suffers from this painful current gift is because of her, because of who she is, because she invited this pain to herself. That I can see as potentially problematic. Illnesses are obviously things that people do not invite onto themselves, so that's bad territory. I've also seen a lot of rhetoric about how Carve the Mark seems to play on this idea of having this illness made me stronger. Look how much it allowed me to overcome, etc., etc. I don't really disagree because I do think that Carve the Mark kind of has that message, kind of has that tone near the end. So let me be honest, and I'm going to admit that I didn't realize that that kind of sentiment was ableism, because that's such common rhetoric when it comes to illness. Like, I think about people who have suffered from cancer but are now in remission. I feel like they often say things like, I'm a survivor, I'm stronger than I ever was, I'm glad that I made it through this because it shows me how much I could handle and it made me learn how to value the true things in life, and so on and so forth. So if that kind of rhetoric is a crime, then yeah, I guess Carve the Mark is guilty. When it comes to this ableism controversy, but also just to all controversy in general, I tend to think a lot about one of the cinema classes I took last semester. My professor would constantly say that it doesn't matter what the creator's intention was if the audience received it a different way. John Green kind of says something similar when he says that books, after they're published, belong to the reader and not to him. Like, art really belongs to the consumer and not the creator. So let me take the time to say this. If Carve the Mark offended you, your reaction is your reaction. Your reaction is never going to be proven wrong. You have the right to think what you think and to feel what you feel. Like in the case of ableism, it doesn't matter if Veronica Roth didn't mean to be ableist or if she didn't intend for ableism to come up in her book. If you have chronic pain and you think that that illness was portrayed poorly or that it was appropriated for the sake of the story, you have the right to stand by that. I'm not trying to silence anyone with this video, and at any point with any of this discussion, if you disagree with what I'm saying, which is probably likely because, you know, controversy is controversy for a reason, that is okay. I am not trying to say that my answer is right and every other answer is wrong. This discussion is a fountain and I'm throwing in my 2 cents, but I'm not claiming it's a $100 bill. So those are my kind of muddled thoughts on ableism. Did you think we were done? Oh no, dear viewer. We still have more to go. The last controversy I want to mention is self-harm. So in Showtech Society, they have a practice called carving the mark after killing someone, meaning they use a knife and they cut a small scar into their arm to remember the life that they've taken. It's supposed to symbolize this idea that a life shouldn't be taken lightly and that weight of the action of killing someone should stay with you. So yeah, that's the thing. This society, the Showtech Society, practices scarification. I think the act of cutting oneself or asking someone else to intentionally cut you can be triggering for some people. So yes, if you know that you're sensitive to self-harm, especially of cutting, be cautious when going into this book. That being said, I don't think Carve the Mark glorifies self-harm. I think it's really important to make the distinction between self-harm and scarification as a societal practice. I think self-harm is often a result of mental illness or any kind of sadness or dissatisfaction that one feels within oneself, whereas scarification as a societal practice doesn't stem from that. It really comes from obviously society, from the standards and customs of this group of people. Scarification, this practice of carving the mark, is not seen as an outlet for mental illness. And so I don't think Carve the Mark romanticizes or promotes self-harm in any way. So in this case, I don't think that it's problematic, but I do think that it can be triggering for sensitive readers. Okay, that's it. Controversy section is over. Thank goodness. It only took like 3 hours. On to the book review. All right, quick summary. Carve the Mark is a sci-fi, more so fantasy actually, book about two opposing societies that share one planet. Our two main characters are Syra, a Shotet girl, who's the younger sister of Shotet's dictator, and Akos, who's a Thuva boy, and he's the son of one of Thuva's oracles. Akos is captured as a young boy and is eventually given as a sort of servant to Syra, and the plot of Carve the Mark and the series revolves around the politics of this planet and also the relationships between all of the different characters that we're introduced to. And wow, that was a really rough summary, but moving forward. I gave this book 3 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. I think my two main issues with this book are its pacing and its world building. For the majority of this book, I found the plot to be very, very slow. For a lot of the book, I actually wasn't really sure what the plot of this book even was. For a lot of the story, this book is very character driven, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but for Carve the Mark, it just didn't work all the way for me. The plot really kicked in the last quarter of the book, but even then the pace wasn't super breakneck. I think to properly enjoy Carve the Mark, you really have to feel investment for your characters. So that's pacing. As for world building, I think that the best word to describe the world building in this book is patchy. Some parts of the world are super fascinating, very well developed, extremely well thought out, with an excellent amount of detail, and then some other parts of the world were just very dimensionless and also very vague. It took me a long time to really absorb and retain all of this world building information, so I was like 2/3 of the way into the book and I'd still be referring back to the glossary because I could not remember what this terminology meant and stuff like that. What's bad about having patchy world building is that for a series like this, for something that's marketed as a space odyssey, I feel like the world should be very immersive. And Veronica Roth gives it her best shot, but it doesn't quite hit the mark. Something I thought Veronica Roth did really well, which is unsurprising to me because it's literally the reason why Divergent is my baby, is she created really well-developed characters. Syra and Akos both felt very real. They each had distinct motivations and character traits and flaws. As you read, you see their character arcs gradually take shape beautifully, and I really enjoyed reading about both of these characters. The story is told through first-person Syra chapters and third-person Akos chapters, and although I love Syra more as a character, when it came to the narration and to the different characters' point of view chapters, I didn't have a preference. I thought both characters' chapters were equally compelling to read. Like I said earlier, I really firmly believe that a lot of a reader's enjoyment of Carve the Mark stems from how much they enjoy their characters. And since I liked Syra and Akos, I ultimately liked Carve the Mark. Last thing I want to mention before I go into spoilers is the writing style. So the writing style feels very similar to the writing in Divergent, obviously same author. So definitely use that as a gauge to see how much you'll enjoy the writing in Carve the Mark. I personally really enjoy Veronica Roth's writing style. I do think that she can be a little heavy on the exposition sometimes, but ultimately I just love how clean her writing is. I'm the kind of reader who loves like poetic writing, but I get really easily fed up when writing is overly flowery. So I can really appreciate the fact that Veronica Roth's writing style doesn't draw attention to itself. Now I'm gonna go into a quick spoiler section for Carve the Mark. So if you haven't read this book, I'd advise leaving in 3, 2, 1, bye. I love the element of having fates. I think fates and prophecies are really fun because they're almost kind of like spoilers, but not really, because usually the author tries their best to make the fate fulfilled or the prophecy fulfilled in a way that the reader doesn't expect. So it's a spoiler, but it's also like a surprise spoiler. So Akos' fate is that he's going to die in service to the Novak family. And so at first I was like, obviously Akos is going to die trying to save or protect Syra. Like, come on, it's told in dual perspective. And we know from Allegiant how that turns out. Nice try, Veronica Roth, but you can't fool me twice. But then we get to the end of Carve the Mark and Rizek reveals that Syra isn't even his sister. Like, his father is not her father, which has me thinking, is Syra even a Novak? Like, if Akos dies in service to the family Novak, does that even include Syra? Or maybe Rizek is the one that isn't a true Novak, but right, doesn't that mean that one of them is not a Novak? So that means one of them cannot be the cause of Akos' death. Syra's fate is that she is gonna cross the divide. I feel like the obvious way of that being true is that Syra's the one who's going to unite the Shotet and the Thuva people and like bring peace and tranquility to the land, to the planet. That seems like the logical conclusion, but it also is just very obvious and very predictable, so I really hope that I'll still be surprised by the end of book 2. Like, I hope Veronica Roth takes it a different direction. As for Aisha, something that really perplexed me throughout so much of the book was this entire memory exchange thing that he has going on with Rizek. So Rizek is swapping memories with Aisha because Rizek is trying to become the Oracle himself or something like that. And that entire thing didn't really make much sense to me. I didn't understand why Aisha was becoming more cold and callous like Rizek, but Rizek wasn't reverting to like being soft and kind. Like, shouldn't there be an equal exchange? Like, if Aisha is growing harder, shouldn't Rizek be growing softer? Sifa, Eikos' mother, definitely feels like a snake to me. I see a lot of similarities between inter-character relationships between Divergent and Carve the Mark, because in Divergent, Tobias has a snake mother, and in Carve the Mark, Eikos has a snake mother. In Divergent, Triss has a horrible brother. In Carve the Mark, Syra has a horrible brother. Out of Triss and Tobias, I think Triss is definitely the harder character. I mean, in Divergent, Tobias is kind of tough and cold, but literally in every book after Divergent, Tobias is definitely like the softer of the two. And I feel the same way about Syra and Eikos. Eikos is definitely the softer of the two. But anyway, I think once politics and assassinations and the renegades are brought into the plot, things get really interesting. But up until that point, the storyline feels very aimless and very unstructured. I'm personally really curious about the groups of exiled people, or whatever they're called, because I feel like there's a potential alliance there. Considering the plot was so slow for so much of the book, I'm really surprised at how much there is to theorize for the second book. I think that suggests that Veronica Roth has laid a pretty decent foundation for the next book and the last book in this duology. And I'm really intrigued to see how all of these plotlines are going to be wrapped up, and more importantly, how these characters' fates are going to be fulfilled. All right, so let me know what you thought of Carve the Mark. Did you enjoy it? Did you hate it? Did you think it was racist, ableist, promoted self-harm, etc., etc.? Actually, what do you think of all this controversy, and what do you think of how people reacted? Because I personally think that there was like a lot of hive mentality, a lot of groupthink going on. It was like everyone was jumping onto the same bandwagon and shunning this book. That being said, I also really respect when people find out that a book is harmful and avoid it because they don't want to experience that harm. That being said, if you're that kind of reader, if you like seeing whether a book has certain elements and you avoid those certain elements, just make sure that your source is reliable and trustworthy is what I would say. I just am honestly like a little disgusted almost at how severely people ganged up on this book for its supposed racism without what I think is proper verification. Anyway, please leave me a comment on Carve the Mark by Veronica Roth. I would really, really love to hear your thoughts. Thanks so much for watching. I'm so sorry that this video was so freaking long, but like I said, I feel like I had to address these things, otherwise this would have been a weird review. Yes, thanks so much for watching. I hope y'all have a fantastic day and happy reading. Bye!